come on, that's never been our style, Harry. Shooters.
Well, it's mine now.
Yeah, but a gun. That leaves us in the cold over here. This is England.
Following hot on the grubby heels of films like Get Carter and Villain, both of which you'll find reviews for on this channel, came this beauty, 1972's Sitting Target, starring the one and only Oliver Reed. Now, Sitting Target was one of the first British films to be given an X certificate for its violent content. And as British cinema left the swinging 60s behind and began to push the envelope of decency, films like this got themselves a strong reputation for being seedy, gritty, hard-boiled depictions of a London underworld and the criminals that inhabit it. And when you have Oliver Reed cast as a psychopathic gangster, you pretty much know you're onto a winner. Let's check it out. So in Sitting Target, Harry Lomax, played by Oliver Reed, begins the movie in jail for violent armed robbery, with a long stretch ahead of him. Making it all the more difficult for him is the fact that his beloved wife Pat, played by Jill St. John, hasn't been to visit him since he went inside, and finally turns up for a visit. Unfortunately for Harry, she comes bearing news that she not only wants a divorce from him, but is actually pregnant with another man's baby, and as you can imagine, Harry's not best pleased.
I'm pregnant.
Anyway, a bit of time in solitary confinement later, and Harry's back in his cell with his mate Birdie, played by young Ian McShane. And the pair go forward with a plan they've been working on to bust out of the joint. In order to do so, they need to form an alliance with another inmate, McNeil, played by Freddie Jones, who sees to it that all three of them can escape. Now, the central prison break in Sitting Target is one of my favourite parts of the film. It's shown as a complex series of obstacles as the trio negotiate guards, a bloodthirsty dog, barbed wire, with the whole thing culminating in a tense climb along a rope suspended high above the yard. However, escaping jail is only the beginning of the pair's problems. Guys, I'm Stephen at Real Classic Film Reviews. Thanks so much for clicking on this video. I do appreciate your support. Please drop a like below, subscribe, and stay tuned for many more classic film reviews. So Harry's determined to get revenge for his wife's betrayal, even at the expense of a safe escape for himself, and his sanity, it seems, eventually. So he picks up a fancy gun and he plans an assassination.
Now you listen to me. Pat's gonna have protection, right? From the mob as well as the law, right? So killing her is gonna use something different from our usual.
Yeah, but
Now, I've mentioned in previous reviews of similar films that I do appreciate seeing the dingy side of London in movies from this era. I love how Sitting Target, similarly to Get Carter in this respect, mostly takes place around regular streets and housing estates, giving it a more down-to-earth feel, and it's got a believably grim atmosphere to the whole thing. And Reed is great here, of course, although by this point, playing a man seething with primal rage probably wasn't the biggest stretch for him, and once he snaps at his wife's disloyalty early on, he pretty much maintains that high level of ferocity right up until the film's fiery finale. So a year before Sitting Target, Jill St. John had played Tiffany Case, the red-headed bombshell Bond girl in Diamonds Are Forever. Here, bless her, she's dubbed over with an English accent, which is a little bit distracting.
Did you get him?
no, not yet.
Call his protection. Where are your men?
Edward Woodward shows up as a police officer. I'm not sure Edward Woodward didn't ever play a police officer. Incidentally, his TV show Callan was just coming to an end in the early 70s, and here he's there to protect St. John from the incoming Reed whilst obviously ogling her, and he does use some quite comical methods to protect her. However, he does get a good breathless, violent fight sequence with Reed on a high-rise balcony that's a standout moment. So I'm a big fan of this film. Sitting Target's one of those gritty, tough thrillers that the UK produced in the late 60s and early 70s. By this time, the envelope was being pushed in terms of the violence that they could show, due to the easing of restrictions on censorship and what you could get away with, really. Sitting Target does deliver on that. We get chase scenes, explosions, and innocent bystanders caught in shootouts.
Oi! What do you think you're doing here? What's going on?
And as I mentioned, it's a plus that all of the action is mostly set in and around housing estates. One of my favourite scenes sees Oliver Reed versus motorcycle cops in an over-the-top chase sequence amongst people's washing lines. It does seem like it was shoehorned into the film because they needed an action scene, but it's okay because it's great. Sitting Target was directed by Douglas Hickox, who, before moving to TV work later in his career, made Theatre of Blood, Brannigan with John Wayne, and Zulu Dawn. Here he keeps things moving along at a quick pace, with the exception of a subplot about Reed and McShane shaking down a former associate, which bizarrely sees Reed playing in a bubble bath and the lovely Jill Townsend not wearing much. Anyway, all the action scenes that we do get are strong, and there's that great vibe of 70s men testosterone running through the whole movie that you just can't get away with these days. Now, I do have to mention, without knowing anything about guns, that the one that Reed carries around in Sitting Target is paid so much attention to that it's practically a character in itself. It does some pretty amazing things, from blowing up motorbikes to hitting targets from huge distances. And as the cast list would suggest, the performances throughout the film are great. The final third throws us some interesting plot twists that do take the movie up a notch over just being a bog-standard revenge flick. So the early 70s also saw an explosion of great crime thrillers in the United States. You know, we got classics such as Dirty Harry and Serpico, The French Connection, Death Wish. And as a response, the UK released films like this, with its locations not filmed in a glamorous style, but a dirtier street-level look, a working-class look that enhances the rough and rugged characters around it. And if you hadn't already guessed, I'm a big fan of British films from this era. Much like the UK of the time, they sit between the garish, carefree 60s and Thatcher's capitalist 80s, and reflect the doom and gloom of the country at that time, you know, in the grip of industrial disputes and mass unemployment. So Sitting Target was a reasonable hit at the time of release, and it's a real shame that it's fallen out of the conversation these days. Let me know if you've seen it and what you think of it, and if you've yet to watch it, go check it out.
Is he in there?
Then we'll wait for him, won't we? Mrs. Lomax.